Article 4 mainly deals with state-to-state issues and some federal-to-state. I'm going to shorten these somewhat. We can read some together so that you'll recognize the wording when you see it on the test and fill in the little circle that says, yep, that's in there. Section 1, full faith and credit shall be given to each state to the public acts. By the way, we're on page 14 at the top. I don't hear anybody reading along. Oh, you don't? Wait a minute. How many of you don't have your constitutions with you?
It's in the other seat.
Hmm?
It's on my other seat.
Your other seat? Go grab it. I know how important it is to have the right stuff. Okay, now, those of you who do have, top of page 14, section 1, that's of Article 4. Full faith and credit
Shall be given in each state to the public acts, records,
and judicial proceedings of every other state.
And the Congress may by general laws
Prescribe the manner
such acts, records, and proceedings shall be
approved and the effect thereof. Okay, now to make it short and simple, faith basically means trust. You have faith in God, you trust God. Credit in this situation means belief. It actually does in those other applications, but it's a belief that you'll pay. But anyway, full faith and credit to the acts, records, and judicial proceedings of the other states. So in other words, if you have, say, your birth certificate, it's as good in the state that you weren't born in as the one you were, just for an example. There's a whole lot of other things that carry over from state to state, although there may be limits put on them. There's a lot of licenses that may or may not actually have been necessary. That's a whole nother discussion. But those are generally received at least for a time. Now, in some states, they might give you 30 days if you're moving in to change over your license to drive your car or something like that. But then there's also, moving on to section 2 here, which is commonly and shortly referred to as privileges and immunities. Let's read that. The citizens of each state okay, hold off right there. Again, it's very similar, but there are things, rights would transfer. You would have the same rights under one state as the other, at least theoretically. Their judicial system may be such that that isn't always the case. But the privileges and immunity transfer all the rights, but the privileges, such as voting, and you know that that's not a God-given right, it's a privilege because there are limits placed on it, specifically things like age, and I think some states pretend to require that you're sane, but others obviously let a lot of people, well, I don't know, you watch some of them out in the streets and you think, those people shouldn't be voting. I'm not sure they should be turned loose. But anyway, so section 2 is privileges and immunities. And then the next clause of part of that is extradition. Well, I guess we better first read it, but looking at it, extra means outside, so I think basically it's like outside the jurisdiction. So how many of you know what extradition means? Okay, I believe you, and I'll just go on because we got several of these things to go through. A person, read the second paragraph now of section 2. A person charged in a state
who shall flee from justice and be found in another state shall act in the hand of the executive authority of the state in which he
kind of fell apart at the end there. Let's just kind of run by that one more time. So this person has fled from one state to another, and he shall, on demand of the executive authority of the state, which would be whom? Who's the executive of the state? Everybody? Anybody? Governor. Shall be delivered up to be removed to the state having jurisdiction of the crime. Then there's a part that's in brackets in your Constitution, and that is because it has been essentially changed or eliminated by Amendment 13, because indentured servants and slaves aren't supposed to be legal in this country anymore. There are people that might testify otherwise on what's going on, but it's not lawful. For sure it's not lawful. Anyway, moving on to Section 3. New states may be admitted by Congress into this union, but no new state
shall be formed or erected in the jurisdiction of any other state, or any state be formed in conjunction
by the conjunction.
or part of the states without consent of legislators concerning as well as Congress.
Okay, so this gives Congress some authority over the creation of new states, especially or particularly in the case where two adjoining states form or want to form a new entity. In what situation in the past did two states join to form a new entity, not a state, but as it turned out, basically a city, only they called it something else? What city is formed from parts of two states? Yes? Washington, D.C., yes. And the D.C. stands for District of Columbia. And of course, Columbia was a very common name for the United States because of its having been discovered by Columbus in 1492. Okay, so this thing may give us a little bit of leverage if we ever need it in the case of them trying to give full statehood to Washington, D.C. They have tried before, and essentially they've given the privileges but not the name. But Washington, D.C. was formed from the two states, but so far as I know, they weren't asking the permission of either Virginia or Maryland to make it a state. David?
What about West Virginia? I mean, it was formed from another state.
It was, and that was at the time of the Civil War, and Virginia didn't have to give its permission because it had left the Union. It not only didn't have to, it in effect couldn't. You can't, resign from your position and then tell somebody how to run it, right? Okay. Next paragraph, read with me. The Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or the property
belonging to the United States, and nothing in this Constitution shall be so constructed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or any particular state.
Okay, that's pretty clear, I think. They can make rules regarding their forts or dockyards or whatever, and otherwise they don't have any special privileges over any of the state. Okay, so federal-state connection, Article 4, Section 4. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government, shall protect each of them against invasion
and or application of the legislature or the executive when the legislature not be
You're not accustomed to long sentences. You need to read lots more of the classics, Treasure Island and books by Charles Dickens and so on. You may not agree with everything they say, but they're generally pretty interesting adventures and stories. and they will acquaint you with 14-line sentences and make it a lot easier to proceed through life. Okay, so in a nutshell, a Republican form, and I believe this was covered in another class before, but we can't restate enough, I think. Republican here has very little, next to nothing to do with the current party calling itself Republican. You may recall that it's from two words, res publica, R-E-S being the first one, and that it refers to the public thing, those things that nobody should mess with. So theoretically, a Republican Party, or a Republican form of government, I should say, would be one in which the state would know enough not to try to mess with your God or with your coined money and so on. Well, quite obviously, we've lost the coinage because we have these toy coins that they've given us, but they've taken the substance out of them. And in U.S. law, a dollar is defined as, 371 1/4 grains of silver? It's been a long time. And 90 fine, that's important, means 90% pure silver. You need a little something else in it to make it hard enough to use. Anyway, Republican form of government. And shall protect them, that is the states, from invasion. Well, they may have the idea about protecting them from armed invasion. Thank you, Norman. But they have allowed millions of people from other places to come into the country. And of course, there's a great deal of concern about that, especially in the states most closely affected by it. They also shall protect the states when they ask, that's basically what you just read, from domestic violence. And domestic the word means, and it's often used now in connection with household violence, bad things that go on within groups, some of which are actually families and others of which are not. But rebellion, uprising. So this is possibly slightly contrary to an expression or two in the Declaration of Independence. Okay, as far as, we'll move on to Article 5, and you've gone through, by the way, the entire article is a single sentence. It's kind of fun if you're into diagramming sentences to get a couple of whiteboards and start in on it and see what you can do. But I would say a handy thing for you to remember about it is the numbers, in effect the percentages, but the fractions, I should say, that are required. That'll be sufficient. For proposing the amendments, by whichever method it's done, 2/3 is required to have it come onto the national floor, so to speak. And for ratification, 3/4 of either the Congress or conventions or whatever. So learn the words too, but just be able to identify quickly on a test or something that it's 2/3 for proposing and 3/4 for ratification. And the 3/4 is the same as was required for our Constitution, so it was claimed ratified on September 17th, I believe, of 1788, 1 year after it was finished. And then they had elections following that and formed the new government with George Washington and all subsequently. Okay, so we've got just a few minutes left to establish the authority of the United States. And I want to point out that we had a government for 10 years. You know this, you've heard of the Articles of Confederation. And one of the things that a debtor country, and we were at that point a debtor country, because France, Spain, the Netherlands, and possibly others, as well as individuals, had forwarded money to us, to the forming United States, the battling United States, to win our separation from England, from the crown. So the first thing they wanted to do is assure everybody that those debts would be honored. We weren't just changing the name of the place and setting up a new constitution so we could say, oh, sorry, that entity no longer exists. We were not trying to skip our debts, so we start out right out saying, you can read with me, all debts contracted and engagements entered into shall be as valid against the United States. This Constitution is under the Confederation. Okay, that's sufficient for that part. Now, we get to what the real authority of the United States is under God. They were very conscious that there were things above and that there was truth, there is truth, and so on. But as far as the particular matters of the federal union of the United States, they said, and I will just go through this because I'll stop at strange parts. This Constitution, okay, so what's the very first authority of the United States?
Constitution.
This Constitution, yes. And the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof. Any laws made by the United States or laws that follow the Constitution? In pursuance of is follow. And all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States. So again, if they've bound us with an unconstitutional treaty to something called the United Nations, and if a rich philanthropist, whose name I believe was Rockefeller, donated some land on the East River in New York and gave that entity permission to build on it, well, I guess that permission to build is valid. But if the agreement itself is unconstitutional, which I think it's pretty clear, but might be a lot of lawyers who disagree with that, we have good reason, solid reason, for getting out from under that. And if we need, if there's some aspect of it that they want to salvage, why don't they make it a United States or free enterprise effort instead? Some people cite the World Health Organization or something. I don't trust those people either, but anyway, okay, so anything made under the authority then, under the Constitution, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. And here's the one where there's kind of a rub again. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Okay, we're down to 10 minutes, and we have one very simple article to go, so I think that should work out. Article 7, the ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states so ratifying the same. And it was done in convention, I am sorry, that's my bad. Done in, okay. Yeah, I think they've left a comma out after the 12th. They're giving, as they used to do in the old country, and you'll find it in the Mayflower Compact also, where they give a year that's kind of the year everybody is accustomed to using, and then they say, and in the year of King so-and-so this, or King Charles that, or whatever. And this one, it's following the same pattern. We can be as as detailed as you guys across the pond. And so it was the 12th year of independence. So we'd been independent for 11 years because we were into the 12th. Okay, questions? I will just give you a little hint that, and some of you may recall from a few days ago, you took a test in which some of these items were quoted, and all you had to do was determine were they real and in consonance with, in agreement with the Constitution, or were they some scurrilous modern addition? And it's those scurrilous modern things that I don't want you filling in, and therefore you lose 10 points if you fill one of them in. But you should, to gain points, fill in those things that you recognize as being in these documents. And I will assure you that I have not made any attempt to be tricky. I'm not somebody that changed an of to a to and said, well, no, you got it wrong. That's not it. It's if the major thrust of the idea is something that's contrary to our Constitution and our amendments, then for heaven's sake, don't be filling it in as true and correct. On the other hand, if I've shortened or put something in brackets that means the same thing as the Constitution, you're safe to fill that in. So with that, I'll bring up